Why do some people call the world of low and no alcohol wines the Wild West, full of outlaws and untamed flavors? How is a Canadian snowboarder revolutionizing both the science of non-alcoholic wine and the future of McLaren Vale Grenache? And why do beer makers have more tools than winemakers do when it comes to creating their non-alcoholic versions? And which creative tricks are they using? Well, tonight you're going to get those tips and stories and more. And before I introduce our guest, if you're watching this video on the replay, please type in the comments replay, or where you're logging in from, or what the weather's like. I want to hear from you. And of course, if you're here on the live stream, get into the comments. I'm Natalie McLean. You've joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, this is the first time I am live streaming this video on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, but it is based on a recording I made for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. I will, however, be here live in the comments with you, so get in there. Let me know what questions do you still have, what stories and tips are you enjoying. I really do want to hear from you. All right, back to our guest. Dr. Wes Pearson is a senior research scientist and sensory group manager at the Australian Wine Research Institute, AWRI, in Adelaide. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Wine Biochemistry from the University of British Columbia, a diploma in Applied Sensory and Consumer Science from the University of California at Davis, and a PhD from Charles Sturt University. He has worked in the sensory group at the AWRI since 2010 and has completed hundreds of sensory studies and authored over 25 research papers in that time. He sits on the board of directors for the McLaren Vale Grape, Wine and Tourism Association, has judged many wine shows and competitions, and has been an educator and judge for the AWRI's Advanced Wine Assessment course for more than a decade. He is also an accomplished winemaker, having made wine in Canada and France, and currently makes wine under his Juxtaposed label in the McLaren Vale, South Australia. And he joins us now from his home in the McLaren Vale. Welcome, Wes. We're so glad you could join us here.
Hi, Natalie. Happy to be here. Great to have a chat.
All right. Okay, so you mentioned somewhere along the way that you are a closet astrophysicist. I can't even say it, astrophysics geek, and that you'd love to open a bottle with the scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson. So what draws you to astrophysics, and have you ever thought about the cosmic coincidences that have had to align for you to go from snowboarding in British Columbia to making wine from 100-year-old vines in South Australia?
I think about that all the time. How did I get here? How did things have to align for me to arrive where I am at this moment? It seems a very small, small chance, percentage of things of lining up to arrive here. But I do think about that all the time. I think astrophysics is something. It's like, it gives you a headache when you think about it. It's so complicated and deep.
What is it for those of us who can't even say the word? Is there a way to explain it at a high level?
It's just how the physics of how the universe works, right? Trying to wrap your head around what exactly is a black hole. Like, you could spend months trying to unpack that and still get nowhere. So, I think that's one of the things that I find really interesting about it, is I really know nothing about it. It's hard to understand. That's the reason why I've been interested in it, I suppose. But it's just a kind of closet interest in it. It's like the YouTube videos I watch.
Of those dancing cats. So you're just curious by nature. No wonder you ended up being a researcher.
I think that is really it. I have this thirst for knowledge. And I really discovered that when I started getting interested in wine, back in my 20s and 30s, and started kind of uncovering a little bit of that, and that hole started getting deeper and deeper, and you start going farther down the rabbit hole, and it was just like I needed to know more and more, and that's really pushed me through my career. That that thirst, that chase for knowledge.
Its own black hole in terms
Yeah,
of learning
it's
about
true.
wine. It is
It's
endless,
true.
isn't it?
Yeah, the more that you know, the more you actually don't know that much.
Exactly. So you're a Canadian living in Wollonga with your partner Cassie and five kids, and
Yeah.
running both a research career and two wine labels. You make wine. That sounds like a lot of spinning plates. How do you do it all? And do your kids, do you have them out there picking grapes?
Yeah, we do actually. Yeah,
Okay.
there's lots of treading water. You're just kind
Yeah.
of trying to keep your head above the surface. But again, kind of like I commented before, I like keep it busy. That kind of that drive to keep things going. That pushes me forward, and and I have the research job. Right, wine's always been my passion. The research job fuels that, but also keeping having my wine label as well. That they're two different things and they serve two different purposes. So one kind of they complement that. I think that's the reason why the name of my brand is juxtaposed, right? They are kind of opposites, but they highlight each other in a certain way, and
How so?
they give you something different. Well, so the research world is very regimented, right? Lots of things, everything fits in a box. You really have to be very detailed and pedantic about how you do things, and that's just and by design, right? We want to make sure that we think about everything before we do an experiment or something like that. That's just how the research world works. Where in winemaking, there's much more of a feel to things. You are armed with all this knowledge and experience, and that informs the decision you make. But it's not always, based on black and white. It might be about feel or the way something tastes, or you may decide to do nothing because because you're armed with that knowledge, right? Sometimes that's the best thing to do is just to stay out of the way. So that in that respect, right, where that they kind of are a little bit different for me, or they offer something different for me.
Right. I can see that. So you were a serious snowboarder before wine took over your life, and you even worked as a developmental coach for the Canadian Olympic snowboard team in 1997. Do you still get out on the slopes, or has that changed into surfing in the McLaren Vale?
It did. It did when I first arrived in Australia, but now it's something my kids do. It's not. I don't get into the water too much anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. I hate to. I don't want to say I'm jaded, but I was spoiled for many years living on the West Coast in British Columbia.
Right, in Whistler, right?
In Whistler, yeah. And so, unfortunately, the quality of the mountains here in Australia is not quite the same. And so, yeah, it's kind of been, that ship has sailed. I'm quite happy to say. If I found myself, in some larger mountains back in North America or Europe or wherever, I might consider it, but it's not high on my list here.
Right.
Got
Kind
other
of like
things.
moving from a Steinway to a player piano in a bar or something. I guess it just doesn't have the same
That's like I
challenge.
said, I don't want to. It's not quite. You're not getting out of a helicopter on some, first descent peak here in Australia. That's not how it works here. So that's fine, and it's okay, right? That was a different time in my life, and I loved it. It was the best, but yeah, I don't need it quite the same way I did when I was younger.
So before we get into your career in low and no elk, you're an alumnus of the prestigious Len Evans tutorial. Tell us about this epic tasting. Maybe paint us a picture of what it's like and what is it for and what did you learn, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, so a bit of background then. The Australian wine industry has a fairly structured and robust wine show system. So all of the we call them the capital city shows. So the large cities in Australia: Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, even Cairns. They all have a large wine show run by their agricultural society. And the genesis of that was in the 70s and the 80s. The level of quality throughout the wines was quite variable. And so a group of winemakers got together and said, we want to establish some wine shows with the goal of, their buzzword was improving the breed. Is that we want to lift the bar for wine producers in Australia, and we want to give them the tools or the feedback that can help them do that, right? So they established these wine shows, and that proliferated to regional areas, right? So we have we have the Adelaide Wine Show, the Royal Adelaide Wine Show, but we also have a wine show in McLaren Vale, and there's the Barossa Valley Wine Show, and et cetera, et cetera.
And these are all competitions where many producers compete with each other and get medals, but also get feedback.
Correct. That they submit their wines in multiple categories. The wines are judged based on on technical parameters from a quality perspective by experienced wine show judges, sommeliers, wine trade people, professionals, and then they're given feedback via the results, not only with the score but also commentary, and with the idea, right? You can improve your, you can improve your wine. What do I need to work on to make my wines better? And so, the judges that do this, they are, experienced wine show judges. So how do you get involved in judging in a wine show if you're a young winemaker? Well, one thing that we do is we have, on the judging panels, we have associate judges. So that's usually, new or younger judges who are getting their first chance to experience that. Their scores don't actually count in the final tally, but they are involved in the process the whole way, and then they get feedback from their panel chairs or the chair of judges on how they've done. All right, so that starts to happen. Starts to get some experience. We also, at the AWRI here where I work, we offer the Advanced Wine Assessment course, which is kind of like a foundational piece for aspiring wine show judges to really get a taste of what it's like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the Len Evans tutorial is, okay, you've been an associate judge, you've probably worked your way up onto a regular judging panel, but you want more and you're good. What do you do? So we have the Len Evans tutorial is it's a tasting over a period of a week that is put on by the wine show, or sorry, not the wine show, the wine industry, the Australian wine industry. 12 people are selected. You have to write an application letter.
Okay.
There's hundreds of applications every year, and it is a 1 week immersive tasting session with the world's greatest wines.
Really?
Benchmark.
So not just Australian.
Not just Australian wines. There is, you have a bracket of Pinot Noir, and within that you've got DRC.
Really, Domaine Romanée-Conti.
And you've got all of the great Australian examples as well. And so, what it is, it's a benchmarking exercise. It's meant to kind of set your benchmarks for what is the world standard and what is the Australian standard. And now I'm going to use that knowledge to apply it to the wines that I'm going to judge when I go forth after this into the wine show system, right? So it's meant to cap off your wine show judging experience.
Right.
And so
how many wines are there, like in total?
Well, you generally do 2 or 3 tasting sessions a day. You might do a blind session in the morning, and then have a master class around lunch, and then you would do another session in the afternoon, and then you have dinner. And at dinner, you are served the most unbelievable wild wines that you could ever experience, and you serve them blind, and you play. They call it wine options, right? So one question I remember at dinner when I was there was, is this wine from the 21st century, the 20th century, or the 19th century?
Wow.
And you're supposed to smell and taste the wine and guess what century. Even the fact that could be considered a question is crazy.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of wines that you're looking at. So
are you allowed to swallow those wines at dinner?
At dinner you are.
Oh, good. I guess the guesses get progressively worse, though, if you're swallowing. But, man, well, look, I can't imagine spitting out DRC.
Well, yeah, it's we were served we were served a wine that was it was blind, it was Chardonnay, it was delicious, and we kind of worked our way through the options. Yeah, it's Burgundy. Yeah, where's it from? Where's the vintage? And then they unveil the wine, right? Oh, it's 2013 DRC Le Montrachet.
Wow.
Oh, I really never considered that might be the wine in front of me while I was tasting this.
Right.
But
right.
One of the really great.
By the end of the week, how many wines have you tasted? Do you estimate?
You probably do 100 a day.
Okay.
And then maybe a few more at dinner. and then there's a 5-day, and it's a 5-day session. And on the last day, you do a DRC complete tasting, and so you taste all of the DRC wines from a particular vintage, and it's kind of like the grand finale of the week. You have to pick which wine is which. So you taste. There was, I think there's 6. Is there 6? I think there's 6, and we didn't taste the Corton, or we didn't have to categorize it. But you have to pick which is Grand Echezot, which is Echezot, which is Romani Saint Vivant, and then you're graded. Now, this is kind of a crazy exercise, right? Because who's tasted all of them together anyway, ever? So, right. But the opportunity to taste these wines.
And just for context, for those who may not know, like one bottle of DRC Domaine Romani Conti can go, I don't know if you can even get one, $1,000, and then they go up to hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction as they become rare or mature. The vintages.
The newest, the current vintage of Romani Conti, the Romani Conti Grand Cru, or that vineyard, is about $15,000 on release.
Oh, one bottle?
One bottle.
My prices are way out of date. Oh my gosh! I was thinking, $1,000. That's crazy. But 15,000.
Yeah, the Echezot and Grand Echezot, you can get those at around $1,000. But they're crazy, right? It's not. They're not wines that are generally bought and drunk. They're bought as investments, and they're kind of these holy grail wines that you would never get a chance to see otherwise. And not only is it great to taste them, but you taste them blind, and so that is a great. That kind of because sometimes the emperor has no clothes, right? Sometimes these amazing wines that have this, the crazy stories and pedigree, you taste them blind and they're not quite all they're cracked up to be, right? Or they are, which is actually a better story, right? When you taste through some of these, I remember tasting through a lineup of Bordeaux, all blind, and some of them were like, oh, good. And then one of them was just like, that wine's unbelievable. Wow, what is that? And it was Petrus. Another $5,000 bottle of wine.
Right.
Wow, I'm so glad that wine actually is really good. It was amazing. So I love to see that after being disappointed occasionally with some of these really famous wines.
And then after you went to the University of BC, worked at Tantalus Vineyards in Okanagan, which is a lovely, lovely winery. But then you landed a prestigious internship at Chateau Léoville-Lacasse, a second growth in St. Julien of Bordeaux. It's way up there too. How did it feel to be going there? What was it like? What was your first impression when you landed there?
It was pretty wild. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when I arrived there. A friend of mine described it as, he kind of laid it out for me. He's like, imagine you're going to mechanic school, right? You're working on cars, you're going to mechanic school, and you graduate school and you get a job with the Ferrari pit crew at F1.
Right.
That was how he described it, right?
That sounds good. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And that was what it was like when I got there. I walked in and, this is not, it would be a medium-sized domain as far as the classified growths go in Bordeaux. But even still, that's probably 500 tons of fruit. That's a small to medium winery here in Australia. That's not a big winery at all. But the amount of resources that these businesses have to make the most incredible wine possible was just it was unbelievable. And what a great experience, right? No expense spared.
Give me an example of something that was...
For instance, they're in the lab, they have 2 GCMSs. So that's a gas chromatography mass spectrometer. So this is something that we have a few of these here at the AWI. We have a bunch of them. But they're they're $500,000 machines. And they're measuring things at chemical compounds at a microgram or nanogram level. So we're talking 9 zeros past the decimal point. So, the detail and the level of information that they collect was astounding. And it was all, and for while I was there, it was all with the idea of getting their picking day right. So they
Okay.
invested a huge amount of resources into looking at their grape maturity at all of their different blocks and tracking them over multiple weeks to kind of to see, all right, this level's going down, this level's going up. Here's our target where we want to be. Here's what the climate modeling says. We're like, it was amazing the amount of, and it just showed, right, like, okay, this is a wine that's $500 or $600 or $700 a bottle of wine, but they're not just, they don't just take your money and run, right? They put so much effort and detail into every little grape that they grow, and that process through to the finished wine. It was really like, it was reaffirming, quite frankly, to see the effort that went into it. And yeah,
Right.
and the
Not
wines
just
were
marketing.
incredible. You're
Yeah.
right, yeah. And to be immersed in the culture too, right? To drink the wines, to eat the food, to be out in the vineyard and working with the vignerons, and in the chateau and the cuve, making the wines. Yeah, it was an incredible experience. I'm certainly very grateful that I got that opportunity. Sometimes these opportunities, they just kind of pop up and the door opens a crack and you just got to step
gotta
through
go.
it when it opens.
Well, you did that again. Yeah, you did that again when you went from Bordeaux to the McLaren Vale in 2008. What drew you to that specific Australian region? In Australia, it's so far away. And do you remember your first impression when you saw those ancient bush vine Grenache vines that eventually became so central to your winemaking?
Well, flew from Bordeaux in December to Adelaide, and it was probably 2 degrees it was cold in Bordeaux. There was actually snow on the ground. And I flew to Adelaide, and I got off the plane, and it was 42 degrees. And I remember walking out of the doors as they opened at Adelaide Airport, and this wall of heat hitting me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. And I was like, I went for a second, like, have I made a mistake? It was so hot. But then you kind of you walk out and you see where you are, and the ocean's right there. And we chose McLaren Vale because of, I was tossing up McLaren Vale and Margaret River. Having always been a big fan of Cabernet. River is one of the big Cabernet regions in Australia. That looked pretty appealing. McLaren Vale's proximity to the ocean, Adelaide to the big city, and then all the little stuff that go around it, right? The stable economy, safe country, they speak English, a great place to raise children, education system's good, all of those little other things, right, that you consider when you're going to move your family somewhere.
Sure.
It just all ticked all those boxes, and very quickly it was apparent that we made an excellent decision.
That's good.
Moving
Good.
to McLaren Vale, it's
Good
an
thing.
incredible place. Yeah.
And what about those Grenache vines? What did they look like the first time you saw those?
Oh yeah, they are these old gnarly things. They're like, they kind of just sprawl up out of the ground. There's no kind of rhyme or reason to them. They're just these big kind of bushes.
Right, because they're not trellis. They're not hanging on wires or anything.
No, and
Yeah.
they're very different to the other vines. Where I first started working, there was a bush vine block, and everything else was trellis. So it was clearly very different. And right away, and especially when that fruit came in, at harvest, it was pristine. It looked great. The ferment smelled incredible. The whole way through it was really intriguing, right? Because I hadn't worked with Grenache up to that point before, and all the effort was being paid to the Shiraz, and the Grenache was kind of an afterthought. It just looked incredible, but it came in. It had probably been picked a little bit too late, so it was a bit overripe. It just didn't get the treatment or the attention that the Shiraz was getting, and I thought that was interesting because to me, it looked, this is something we should be paying attention to.
Yeah. Why do you suppose that was? Was it just Shiraz was a badge wine for Australia?
Yeah, I think there is part of that, and it's lots of producers have hung their hat as that being their premium wine, and it should be. Don't get me wrong. Like McLaren Vale Shiraz is an incredible thing, and there's actually not much Grenache in McLaren Vale. It's only about 7%. of the red plantings in McLaren Vale are planted to Grenache. So it is a small. We're working off a small base, but it was just and I think historically, Grenache was the filler. So you could leave. Grenache loves the heat, right? So you can leave it out in the vineyard. It's going to be fine. The Shiraz has to come in first. We'll get the Grenache later when we have some space in the winery. And it was used to like fill up the blends, right? It was because it had lots of flavor. It always had lots of alcohol as well. So it was not it wasn't the top dog. It kind of was the back filler. And I think that was probably, throughout the 90s and the 2000s, that was kind of the way things rolled. And then, and then in about 2010, maybe around there, maybe a little earlier, there's a few producers started saying, maybe we got some pretty good resource here. Maybe we should think about investing a bit more time and effort into what we've got with Grenache here. And for myself, I started my own brand in 2011, and I'm like, this is what I'm going to hang my hat on. Grenache is something that I think is a unique proposition that isn't, don't have a lot of it. And we have these old vines that are just like, this is a resource that is just not found around the globe. There's never been phylloxera in South Australia, so they're all planted on their own original roots.
Okay.
This is something that we should need to this is a story we need to tell. And so that was kind of the genesis for getting started with Grenache and kind of trying to move that.
We'll get back to Grenache, but we'll carry on now with your sensory work and leading into the alcohol-free space. You've explained previously that traditional sensory science, you don't use professionals because their foundational knowledge can bias the way they approach a product, smell a wine, noting that a consumer would look at a wine and describe its color, while a winemaker might be thinking about why is it that color. Can you give us an example of this subconscious bias at work? Like, why do you tend to avoid them?
I think that, our goal as sensory scientists, when we're trying to apply sensory science using classic scientific principles, one of the main things that we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate people's bias. And so that's in that context, we the way that we test people. So we have sensory booths, right? You go into it's not quite an isolation booth, but it kind of is, right? There's partitions beside you. You're all blocked off. We use a particular light. Everyone has the same light. All these. We're trying to control any differences that people might have to when they're assessing the wine. So if I'm tasting a wine and you're sitting beside me and I smell and taste it and I make a face, well, didn't like that one. You see me do that, right? Instantly, you're like, what is that guy tasting? He didn't like it. Is that this one? Or you've stopped focusing on what you've been tasked to do, which is assess the wine, right? So that's a classic example of just something easy as partitions here so that you can't see what the next person is doing. It's the same thing with tasting a bottle of, if you've got a Grand Cru Burgundy in this hand and I show you the label and you go, you want a glass of that? It's $1,000 a bottle. Yes, I do want a glass of that, please, thank you. And you'll enjoy the glass. Now, if I just poured you the glass and handed it to you, your assessment of that is much different, right? Because you don't have the bias of knowing where it came from, how much it cost, all the things that go around that, that particular label or brand. You cut all that away, and you just smell and taste the wine and assess it on those qualities. So there's all of these things that kind of influence bias. What did you have for breakfast? That can definitely influence the way that you taste. Did you just finish drinking a coffee, or did you have some orange juice? Those are two different drinks. One's full of sugar, one is quite bitter. That's going to affect the way that you taste the wines. You want to cut all that away.
Right. You try to eliminate you control all the variables. But with professionals, why would it matter if a winemaker is thinking, why is it this color? Like, how does that bias your data?
Well, it takes away from their focus. Okay. And so they may, if they look at the color, so say there's you've got a wine that is, hints of brown, is quite thin colored. Beside it, you've got something that's vibrant purple, dense. You look at those colors and okay, if you're a winemaker, you can see into those things and go, well, this wine on the left here has been, it's been treated with respect. It's vibrant still. It's maintained its color. The one on the right, it looks like it hasn't been looked after quite as well. Now you've already decided what those wines, what they look like and where they where they come from. Now you're smelling it. You think that this wine is kind of old and not looked after. That's going to affect the way that your perception goes, right? Oh, the nose is kind of versus this one. Oh, it's bright. So it's kind of like a confirmation bias.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
But
then you pioneer. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if you don't understand any of that, right? You just go, that one's brown, that one's purple. Next.
Right. With yes. Okay, I can see now how that would inform your answers. However, you pioneered the use of pivot profiling, a relatively new sensory technique that was first used in Champagne, France, and then adapted for Australian wine. Can you explain how pivot profiling works and why it plays to the strengths of wine professionals like sommeliers and winemakers whom you'd normally never use?
Sure. The thing about pivot profile is that it's a sensory method that requires you. It's what we call a free choice method. So when you are assessing the wine, you can smell, taste the wine, and then you use your own language to describe the wine. So that's different from a lot of the sensory stuff that we do, where we use sensory panelists without experience. They would use, right, I smell raspberries, right, where a winemaker might go, oh, I smell, beta ione. So there's a technical underpinning to their knowledge, and that doesn't work well if you're trying to describe someone. Like, what does beta ione smell like? Nobody knows, except unless you're a winemaker or a flavor chemist. But if you say raspberries, well, everyone knows what raspberries are. So this is why, again, one of the reasons why we used sensory panelists and not winemakers. But in this context, winemakers have a very deep and well established language for describing wines, right? More than, say, your average wine taster. And so when you're using free choice profiling, when you're using your own words to describe the wine, that kind of robust language that they use is a benefit to being able to describe the wines in this context, because it's a sensory method that is based around frequency of use of terms. So how many times is someone saying a particular term, right? And because winemakers, they all talk a similar language, we find there's lots of congruency with the way that they describe the wines. And so that ends up being a box to tick. It's good. It's a positive in having them use that. And so for us here at the AWRI, it's been a method that we try to use when we are going to work with winemakers, because it plays to their strengths versus some of the other methods, which are, kind of got to pull them back a bit.
Right. Okay.
So it's been
good.
Successful in that respect.
Yeah, no, it sounds like good technique. So getting into the non-alcoholic wines, you wrote in your blog in 2020, no alcohol, low alcohol wines accounted for less than 0.5% of the total global wine consumption, yet the segment is growing. Where do we stand now in 2025? Is this one of the fastest growth categories among wines, or what kind of stats would you point out these days?
The growth is still significant. As you pointed out, it's off a small base, right? We're talking about less than 1% of production. It may be approaching that 1% now. So we're still not talking about a large segment in the wine game, but the growth is like this. So, okay. And if we look at the rest of wine categories, there's consistent growth in the no-low segment versus some of the other categories, which are flat or declining. So, right. So that's a positive, and certainly something wine producers look at and go, maybe we should be thinking about something like that.
Right. Right, absolutely. And what's the misconception people have in the wine industry about low and no alcohol? I mean, I've heard it all. It's not real wine. It doesn't taste good. But is there one big misconception that you'd like to counter about them as a category?
Certainly, they've gotten a lot better since the last time you tasted them. How about that? The resources and the efforts that have been put into the like new product development for some of these products is significant, and
Right.
they're night and day to what they were even 5 years ago. They're significantly better now. Lots of pundits will be, they still don't taste like wine. It's like, well, you're probably not wrong. They still don't taste like wine, but they've come a long way. And I think, to be honest, I don't know if they'll ever get to the point where they taste like wine. And maybe they don't need to. But I guess that's another debate to have with for whomever. But at least they are good drinks.
Right.
They're tasty. I think that's been a big advancement in the categories. They're not terrible anymore.
They're not terrible. Damn with faint praise. So would the Holy Grail be setting up two wines and you could not tell the difference which had alcohol and which didn't? Would that be the Holy
Yeah,
Grail?
I think so. And I think there's like, are we talking about Cabernet or Shiraz in Australia's
Right.
context? You know, I probably not. But are we talking about Prosecco? Okay, I think that's quite possible. So they're in certain categories, I think that there's these products are better suited than others.
Yeah.
So
And you mentioned Prosecco. Is it just because that has bubbles which helps with the body and feel and weight versus.
absolutely.
And then why are then, if I've heard the tiers kind of, sparkling does best in the low and no, then whites, I don't know, maybe rosés, and then reds are really, why are reds so difficult? Because is it the tannin and the color compounds? Like what's making it so hard to make good non-alcoholic red wines?
Well, I think generally speaking, red wines are higher alcohol than everything else,
Right.
right? Unless we're talking
So
about
you're taking
fortified
more
wine,
out.
but I've yet
Yeah.
I've yet to see a de-alkalized fortified wine. But yeah, you're losing more, and from a textural and mouthfeel perspective, reds would be at the top of the hierarchy as far as that's concerned, and so you're losing the most. We're also, and we'll probably talk about this more later, but as you concentrate, as you de-alkalize, you're losing, let's say 14 or 15% in ethanol, but that's 15% of the product. So you've now concentrated your product, so you have more tannin and you have more acid. So that
What's
has
left?
come out
Yeah.
of it's more unbalanced than say a white wine, which you've lost the ethanol, but there's no tannin per se, as a textural element in those wines, and also with sparkling, of course, is the same, right? Sparkling wines, they are starting off at lower alcohols, generally speaking, to most whites. You can have a bit of residual sugar in sparkling. It's part of the accepted style, if you will, right? Where you can't, if you have a Shiraz or Cabernet, you can't just dump a whole bunch of sugar and say, oh, people go, well, it's sweet red. I don't drink sweet red. But you
Right.
can get away with that in styles like Moscato or
True.
Prosecco or light sparklings. So there's a bit more things to work with in those styles that will play to the strengths of a de-alkalized wine. So that's where I see the and again, looking back to what was being made 5 years ago in those categories, they're night and day. Those products
Right.
are good now. They're reliable.
Yeah, true. So let's talk about a little bit of the history of non-alcoholic wines. There was a German family winemaker, Carl Jung, not the psychologist or whatever, not Freud's disciple, who first reduced alcohol in the 1800s. So was he the pioneer in first creating non-alcoholic
Yeah,
wines?
I think so.
Okay.
I haven't heard about anybody doing anything different prior to him. The story goes that he was somewhere in India in the Himalayas, and that you noticed that water boiled at a lower temperature, and started thinking about, oh, well, how would I? They had a family winery, and I wonder if we can take ethanol out if we boiled it at a lower temperature. Understanding, of course, that ethanol, classic distillation, ethanol boils at around 70 something degrees, and water would boil at 100, of course. So you could boil your ethanolic solution, remove the ethanol, trap it on this side, leave your water here or whatever solution you have the ethanol in, and then keep the ethanol, right? That's classic distillation. Right. Normally, we just keep the distillate, we keep the alcohol, and get rid of what we've taken it out of.
Right.
Now we want to keep what we've taken it out of and get rid of the ethanol. So that was you started playing with different vacuums and being able to lower the air pressure to be able to remove the ethanol at a lower temperature, because, of course, to get 70 degrees, to get hot enough to get rid of the ethanol, well, you've now pretty much cooked your wine. And so now that was why, well, let's just get rid of it. We don't want to keep it. So if you could lower that pressure and do it in a vacuum, now you can boil that ethanol off at, say, 40 degrees, 35 degrees, and now you haven't destroyed the wine from a temperature perspective like you would have if you were boiling it to distill it. So that's the whole premise behind vacuum distillation.
Right. Okay. So that was one of the first early methods.
That's right. Yeah.
Although vacuum distillation, I guess, has been around since 3600 BCE. But anyway, Carl Jung, he does seem famous for it in terms of marketing it and creating a brand from it. How is that different from reverse osmosis, RO? And when did that come about as it relates to creating non-alcoholic wine?
So that technology was developed in the 70s and the 80s. And the difference between reverse osmosis is that's a membrane process. That's a membrane distillation. So you're not heating anything up. You're passing something through a membrane. So technically, that's quite different, and structurally as well for how you remove the alcohol. How it works is you have osmosis is the process of one thing at a high concentration moving to another that has a lower concentration of it, right? Things tend to flow through osmosis. Through reverse osmosis, we're pushing something with a pump in the reverse direction from, in this context, it's from a high alcoholic solution to a very low alcoholic solution to remove the ethanol. So imagine, if you will, you've got the ethanol going this way and you've got water going this way, and the ethanol is being pushed through a membrane into the water coming out. So you're removing ethanol from the top stream in putting it into the bottom stream. Okay. Now, and that's based on the gradient of being, high alcohol and no alcohol. So the problem with reverse osmosis is that as your alcoholic portion decreases in ethanol, that gradient becomes lower and lower. So you need more and more water or whatever it is that you're using to drive that. So that's why we see our reverse osmosis used as an alcohol adjustment technique and not a dealcoholization process. Okay. To get to zero.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, because in warmer climates like California or even Australia, if you're hitting 15-16% alcohol, you might want to take it down a couple of points or whatever.
That's where we see reverse osmosis used significantly. Okay. And it's an easy process to use, right? I know here we have many contract processors who can come through, adjust your wine very quickly and easily, and quite cost effectively as well. The technology is much cheaper and more accessible. But it's more an adjustment as opposed to a complete dealcoholization. You get to about 5, 6, 7%, and it starts to lose its effectiveness. And so now you're using a lot more resources, energy, water, to try to get that last little bit, and it ceases to become economically viable when there are other options for removing alcohol. So that's where we tend to see reverse osmosis used. But you get a different final product. It works different. The compounds that the flavor compounds that are in the wine, they're affected differently than what we see with vacuum distillation. So it's a good thing.
Okay. All right. Then another technology or method is the spinning cone, SCC, originally invented by Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisations, CSIRO, in the 60s to capture delicate passion fruit aromas that were being lost in fruit juice concentration. So how does that technology work with wine?
So that is also a vacuum distillation unit. And it's a pretty clever little machine. Imagine so you've got a column,
Mm-hmm.
and in that column you've got, for lack of a better word, dinner plates.
Okay.
Stacked dinner plates all down this column. And one of them spins, and the next one is fixed, and then another one spins, and the next one's fixed. And what happens is that the liquid is pushed through the top, it hits one of the spinning plates, and centrifugal force spreads out the liquid along the plate. Now, while that's happening, this cone is under a strong vacuum, and steam is being injected from the bottom. So the wine is coming through the top, and the steam is coming up from the bottom. You've got these plates where they've got the centrifugal forces spread out the liquid to a very, very thin layer, and as the steam moves up, it takes the alcohol and passes it out through the top, and the dealcoholized wine comes out through the bottom. And so,
Okay.
and because it's under a strong vacuum, it happens at about 35, 37 degrees. Again, as I mentioned before, with vacuum distillation, you're not cooking the wine; you're doing it gently. So that's been a technology that has been pretty well adopted here in Australia and globally for the complete dealcoholization of wines. They started off doing, like you said, passion fruit juice and a few other things, and then they figured out it actually was really good at getting alcohol out of the wine. And it's since been kind of shifted into that kind of role in the wine industry. It's also a machine they use to make freeze-dried coffee, and they use it in a lot of their food processing applications. But it really works really good at getting alcohol out of wine. So that's something that we've been working with the companies that build those for a few years, trying to optimize that to try to get it to leave as much flavor in the finished product as it can. Because that's one, again, similarly to all the other dealcoholization methods, you tend to lose a lot of flavor while you also lose the ethanol.
Right. And is there a way to put back the flavor, like get rid of the alcohol but put back the flavor compounds to the remaining liquid?
Well, that's one of the things that we're working on. You have this, the ethanol that comes off that, of course, all the flavor that was in the wine is now in the ethanol. So now the trick is to remove the flavor from the ethanol to be able to put that back in the wine, of course, because you can't add the ethanol back. But removing those flavor compounds from the ethanolic solution has proven to be pretty difficult. It's not quite that simple. And so what we tend to see is that if your product is, if you were trying to make a no alcoholic product, so that would be an ethanol level less than 0.05, so basically just the trace, you can't add any of that back. But if you're only going to make to 0.5, which I would think most of the products on the market these days are around that, you can add a little bit of that flavor back to get that concentrated ethanol and flavor back to your dealcoholized wine to get to that 0.5% alcohol. And then you get a lot of flavor with that as well. So that's something that people have been doing. But working on getting that flavor out of the ethanol is quite a challenge. We're looking at a few different things to try to work on that.
And is that because ethanol is a very sticky molecule or something? Like it doesn't want to release what's the flavor component that's in it?
Those flavor compounds, they love, for lack of a better way to describe it, they love being in the ethanol. They're like to be dissolved in that ethanol. They're very comfortable and they're very stable in that. To get them to come out of that solution and to go into something that's water-based, for instance, it's very tricky.
It's hard. Okay, interesting.
They're quite happy to be there, and so they don't want to be disturbed.
No. Similarly, I don't want to be disturbed when I have a glass of wine. Don't take me away from it. But of course, one of the barriers for widespread use of the spinning cone is that they're $1 million a piece, which prevents small and medium wineries from experimenting. Do you think this technology will become more accessible? Like, will it come down in price the way computers kind of, exponentially have got more and more powerful and more affordable?
I don't think so, because
Okay.
they're because they're big machines, so that they have
Okay.
they're not the ability to scale them will not. There's not a lot of potential in that. I think what might happen is that there'll be more. So there aren't many of these machines at the moment, and so if you want to process, say I'm a new business, I'm like, I want to make some de-alkalized wine or make a no or low alcohol one. I would engage the contractor to help do process my wine, to do the new product development, all of those things, but it's expensive.
Mm,
And we're talking about products here. We're not talking about premium products. We're talking about,
right.
no alcohol wines are generally not very expensive. It's sub $20, anyways. So when you're looking at that category, it's hard to justify adding all these costs to your product that you've already developed, all the wine you've already, you've grown the grapes, you've turned them into wine, stored them, all of this stuff. Now you're going to add more costs to it.
Right.
When you run the economics, you're like, I don't know if I
Yeah.
want to take this chance, right? And so I think that's
Especially
been
when
one of,
consumers view it as, oh, I'm paying for something that doesn't have alcohol. It should be cheaper than an alcoholic product.
that's exactly right, right?
Yeah.
I'm getting less, so I want to pay less, right? So
Yeah.
that's been a problem and a bit of a barrier to, because I feel like in lots of industries, not just the wine industry, but certainly it's true in the wine industry, is that you see a lot of innovation and progression from the small producers, right? People who aren't afraid to take risks and try things. There's learnings in that. Then and then they go forward. The bigger companies look at that and they go, "Oh, that didn't work. We're not going to do that." But that one worked pretty good. How do they do that? And then there's adoption, right? And then the adoption happens through the industry and it works its way up. In this product category, it starts at the top because of the
Huh.
costs involved, right? And the risks
Right.
involved. And so, the small producers, they don't have the opportunity to play in this space in the same way. And so the innovation or the curve of of these products getting better has worked in a different way than it, say, traditionally has. And it's a bit of a barrier for small producers to get into it, right? They're not willing to invest in $1 million machine
Sure.
to process their grapes, and also probably doesn't fit a lot of their brand MOs, right? Like, they're small wineries, they're wineries, where larger wineries are more, they could be, they're a drinks company or a beverage company, right? So they're
Right.
more happy to
Filling
play
out
in
a
that
product
space.
line. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not foreign to them. Where it's
Right.
kind of like small producers, like, what is that? I don't want to do any of that. Like, they're just, it's just much more. There's
Yeah.
much more kind of trepidation around it.
Absolutely. So, just summarizing quickly some of the other techniques that can keep alcohol lower, probably not eliminated completely, but when you're growing, picking grapes earlier in the season, you're going to get sugar levels that are lower, so there's less alcohol for the yeast to eat and convert into alcohol would be one. Others are letting leaves or the canopy grow thicker, shielding the grapes from the ripening sun. Some are experimenting with so-called lazy yeasts, which I presume don't convert as much of the alcohol. They give up early.
Yeah, that's right.
These are these others are managing their fermentation, perhaps the temperature or how long the ferment goes, or stopping it early and getting residual sugar but lower alcohol. Do you see these techniques being effective, or is one kind of emerging versus the others in terms of making good low alcohol wines?
I think these are strategies that producers can. They're levers that they can pull to bring their alcohol levels down. They won't get to 0 or even 2 or 5, right? Like, we're seeing this. There's a fairly good proliferation of wines in the New Zealand lighter from their project that was running in the mid-teens, where they invested a lot of research and R&D into figuring out how they could pull back the sugar, slow down the plant from producing its sugar while still phenolically and phenologically ripening the grapes. So
Getting
you're
those
harvesting,
flavors. Yeah.
that's right. So you're harvesting ripe grapes, but at lower sugar levels. And we see
Right.
those wines, and they're between 8 and 10%, and they're pretty
Yes.
good, right? They
Yeah.
look like
Doctors, I think, is one of them. I think
yeah,
there's a brand
that's
called
right.
Doctor. And
he's
it's
done a good job with
excellent.
the Pinot Noir as well.
Yes.
And what I really like about those wines is that they've reduced the alcohol by a good between 20 to 30%, maybe 25-ish. They still look like the variety that they are. They're quite palatable. They're pretty good wines. I think I think certainly smaller producers, smaller to medium-sized wine producers, look at that and go, now that's something that we can do. We can adopt that and make that work within our business, right? You're just using
Sure.
viticulture to slow down the ripening. You're using a yeast that converts sugar at a lower rate. Right? You might get 1% alcohol out of that, but we've got so much sugar in grape juice, it has to go somewhere. And
Right.
Until we figure out a better way to, alcohol is the most efficient thing to turn it into, right? What do we create when we ferment? Fermentation, the yeast ferment the sugar, and they produce heat, carbon dioxide, and alcohol. Now we can potentially push the pathway to produce more carbon dioxide, but I don't think that's a great answer either. That's a lot of carbon dioxide now we're putting into the atmosphere. This is maybe not the answer. So where are we going to do with all this sugar, right? So a good option is to try to slow the sugar production down.
Right.
I think so. I do think there's some traction there, and I think those wines in particular are going to get better. And there's also a premiumization option with that too, right? I think, as you mentioned, when you take the alcohol out, consumers are like, well, I'm not paying more for that. I want to pay less. But if you still have a product that's it's got 2 or 3 degrees alcohol less, still looks like the variety, it still comes from a place, right? It has
Tastes
all
good,
those. Yeah. That's right. It has all those wine cues that we all think are important. We all enjoy, and so. And then you can charge accordingly, right? You don't have to discount the product because you've taken the alcohol out. So I think
Sure.
that's a way forward for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to summarize what beer makers do quickly, but correct me if anything is not right or accurate. But as I understand it, beer makers have a few more ways they can dealkalize their products that are not available to winemakers, because brewers first need to soak their grains, like wheat or barley, in a warm or hot water to release the sugars so that the yeasts can eat them and make the alcohol, whereas the yeasts go right to town on the grapes. They don't have to do that. This is, for the brewers, it's called the mash, and they can drain off the beer and reuse the mash to make another batch of weaker beer, kind of like reusing a tea bag in several cups of hot water. Another method is to use colder water with the mash, which will also make a lower level of alcohol because heat speeds up extraction and solubility, just like if you put your tea bag in a cup of cold water. Is that accurate? And is this sort of exclusive to beer makers versus winemakers? And is there anything else?
Yeah, no, that's totally correct.
Okay.
Those are a bit more old school methods. I think one of the new ways that we're really seeing with beer is using specific yeasts. So one of the differences in beer, first of all, is the sugars that you get from the mash, right? So in grape juice, you get glucose and fructose is the majority of the sugar that is in the juice. In beer, you do get some glucose and fructose, but it's mostly maltose and maltotriose. So now they've selected for yeasts that will only ferment the glucose and fructose, and it won't ferment the maltose and maltotriose.
Clever.
And so you only get a low amount of, you might get 1% alcohol in that ferment. You still get the fermented flavors, and it still tastes like beer, but it doesn't ferment the maltose and the maltostriose, which does give a bit of perception of sweetness, but not as much. So you get a product that is still fermented and still looks like beer, but at a much lower alcohol. And so that's been a new kind of method over the past few years that I think has really moved the needle forward. And if you look at those products, they're pretty good. Like,
Yes.
there's lots of non-alcoholic beers that really are pretty close to a beer. Like,
They are.
so yeah, they've just got more tools in the toolbox, right?
Okay.
You can have, if you look at a label on a beer can, it's got ingredients. There's no ingredients in wine. Wine is grapes. It's
Right.
fermented grapes, right? Like that's what we're allowed to have. So there's a lot of levers they can pull to try to, work that. And they've got less alcohol to get rid of too, right? We're talking 4%.
Right.
It's
That's true.
much easier to go from 4 to 0 than it is to go from 14 to 0. I can tell you.
Absolutely. So, and to that point, wine has to be concentrated by about 30% after dealcoholization because you've removed so much volume with the alcohol or the ethanol. So the acids become more powerful, the pH or the alkalinity is lower, and of course the flavor has gone. What about those 75 up to 75 additives or whatever that we've heard of that you can put into wine, like tannins or I don't know, absorbic acid or gum or arabics, whatever. Do those help at all?
We do a little
anything
bit.
like that? Okay.
Now, the thing about processing aids in wine is that none of them are really designed to build mouthfeel because we don't need mouthfeel in wine, right? We've got ethanol. Ethanol provides all that texture and richness, right? And you get a
Okay.
bit from gum arabic. Tannin is more about astringency and things like that. Ascorbic acid, again, it's a different organic acid, but it's generally used as a preservative, and it's not particularly the sensory effect of tartaric acid. There's so much more of it in wines that you don't notice it that much. So those additives are or processing aids, I think they like to call them, right? They're not they're just not built for this, or the idea behind using them is not to serve the same kind of purpose that we would for a non-alcoholic wine. Now, if you take you kind of mentioned off the top about the cowboys and all kinds of different things going on in this category. Once you take all the ethanol out of wine, it's actually no longer wine. So this can now be a wine-based beverage or a beverage made from grapes, right? And so that changes what you can then add to your product to try to build mouthfeel. So that it's a bit of a gray area, and that's where we see all kinds of stuff popping up here, additives that are wine specific or wine allowed, or that are not. And now
like herbs and botanicals and things like that.
Sure,
like other.
that's right. And,
Okay.
and I would tend to agree. I think that we don't necessarily need to follow the same parameters if we're just trying to make something that's a nice drink, right? We need to use some other stuff because we've taken out a lot of the stuff that makes wine wine. So what are we going to put back that can make this an interesting and tasty beverage? That's
Right.
I think that we need to do some of that because I can tell you clearly when that stuff comes off, when that wine comes off the spinning cone column, it's not a pleasant drink, right?
No.
It's had
What
all
does
this
it taste
flavor on-
like?
Oh, it's extremely acidic, right? You concentrated the acids by like 1/3, and as well you've lost all the flavor, right? So the flavor that balances out all that acid, it's gone
Yeah.
as well. So
Right.
you really don't have. We need to do a lot of work in building that back up. It's not a particularly pleasant drink. So
Yeah.
like I was saying, we should use more tools that we have to try to build some of these up to build flavor. Now, of course, again, from the economics behind this, these are not expensive products, so we can't just whack everything in there and just hope for the best, right? We have to have some judiciousness when it comes to how much these things cost and how much you can add. And how can we do this to maybe recover what we've taken out and put back so that it's more cost effective? So this is all part of the research that we're working on.
Sure. And yeah, because, alcohol, I mean, it really does contribute to mouthfeel, like the viscosity, the warmth, the friction. I mean, are there some things that you're experimenting with to add specifically mouthfeel?
Yeah, we've tried lots of stuff.
Okay.
We've looked to the like food industry to try to see what are people using, what do they use in different beverages and different foods to replicate that same kind of effect, right? What do they use to add texture? Now, with everything that we've tried, we haven't found anything that really, there's things that definitely add texture to the beverage,
Like what?
but they're not wine-like. Right?
Okay.
It doesn't. You taste it and you're like, okay, well that's thicker, but it's not. It doesn't
It doesn't
resemble
feel like
wine,
wine. Okay.
right? And so that is kind of not necessarily, so pretty much right away you're like, it's not going to work, right? Consumers are not going to go, oh, they've replaced that, and that looks more wine-like, right? It has to be. So those kinds of, we haven't had a lot of success in that space. Ethanol is such a unique compound chemically. There really
Right.
isn't a lot of things that replicate it from a sensory perspective. So there's probably a couple of things that we're going to try to do. I think when we think about wines, where we'll get some progress is that we'll look at how are we making these wines to begin with, right? Normally we just say, oh, okay, we're going to make a dealcoholized wine. Just take that wine tank there and dealcoholize it, and we'll work. No, we need to be thinking about in the vineyard, how are we growing these grapes? How are we processing these grapes when they come into the winery? What we've always done to make them traditional wines, maybe that isn't how we need to do this. Maybe we need to rethink what we're doing. And so, again, this is some of the research that we're working on. Although that kind of thing moves a bit slower, because it's not like you can just go in the lab and add a few different things and see which one tastes good, and we'll go, right, you got to grow the grapes all year. you only get one time a year to practice. So
Yeah.
so this stuff happens a bit slower. But these are the kind of things that we're working on, right? What levers can we pull in the vineyard and during winemaking that will set that wine up to be a better dealcoholized product
Yeah.
in the end?
And you've said that the aroma compounds or thiols in Sauvignon Blanc, the one that makes the grassy or grapefruit, passion fruit aromas, actually stay in the wine during dealcoholization, which is why Sauvignon Blanc is often used as a base. Is that just the particular molecular structure that works, whereas rose petals disappear? Or
well, no, it's exactly that, right? So
yeah.
So most of so we call them fermentation products. All right.
Okay.
So when the yeast eat the sugar in the grape juice, those sugars are all attached to all kinds of other chemical compounds. They're glycosylated. It's called, right? That's attaching the sugar compound to whatever flavor. The yeast come along, they eat the sugar, release the flavor compound, and so those fermentation products, most of them are esters and organic acids. Now the esters are the really pretty things that we smell. All the fruity flavors, and the organic acid portions of those, they're less appealing. For instance, right? So hexyl acetate smells like apples. Smells like red apples. It's very pretty.
Okay.
Hexanoic acid smells like stinky cheese and sweaty socks. So you get a mix of these both, but you get a lot more of the acetate. So you get a lot more of the nice flavors as fermentation products. Now, when you put those through the dealcoholization machine, the spinning cone column in particular, all of the acetates, all of the esters,
the nice ones, yeah. Okay.
And the organic acids stay.
Okay.
So you get the stinky stuff staying, and you get the nice stuff going.
But you also get the grassy stuff staying. Yeah.
But within Sauvignon Blanc, it's similar, right? So one of the thiols you're talking about in particular is called 3-mercaptohexanol and 3-mercaptohexyl acetate. Now those compounds, you lose the acetate, but actually 3-mercaptohexanol smells lovely. It smells like passion fruits. And so that stays. And so that's why Sauvignon Blanc is probably a good one, because we're going to maintain that passion fruit character in the finished wine. Where if your wine doesn't have thiols, so something like Chardonnay, which is much lower in thiols, you don't get that retention of that character. So so now, from a research perspective, how can we facilitate the production of 3MH and less so 3MHA, right? Okay, so these are the kind of research questions that we look at, like, all right, these are the levers that we can pull. We're going to promote this compound and not this one in the ferment, so that our base wine has more of the compound that's going to stick around after dealcoholization.
Okay.
So yeah, this is it, right? And
Fascinating. Yeah.
this is kind of the process, and we'll try this again. At harvest time, we'll make some wines. We'll see if we can make more of that compound, and then our finished Sauvignon Blanc will have more 3-mercaptohexanol, and will smell more like passion fruit.
That's
it's a
quite
slow
the tasting
process,
note.
but we get
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can
It's
imagine
pretty
using those.
complicated.
So let's talk about brands and marketing and that sort of thing. Have you tried some of the ultra premium alcohol free wines like Geronimo and French Bloom, which is, as you probably know, made by a member of the Taittinger family who are famous for their champagnes, and now Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy has purchased a stake in the company. Both of these wines are over $100, these no alcohol wines. So have you tried them or ones like them that are in the ultra premium category?
I have not, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
I can say, though, I was speaking with Dr. Jamie Good a couple months ago. He told me he tried French Bloom, and he was very impressed.
He was impressed.
Yeah,
Okay.
he said the product was good. And so, for me, there's, look, with a company like that, they've got resources.
Yes.
And
They have the machines.
And I can tell you, that's what you need to make these products good, is you need resources.
Right.
You need a team of people. You need equipment. You need to be able to have the time and the equipment to be able to do trials and to really refine your product. And so, to me, as we would know, they've got some resources. So I'm not surprised that product is market leading, quality wise. I think it is. I think that's a small niche, though. I think there is.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that make wine great and interesting, and I think that we all really love about wine is that, it comes from a place, and it tastes like it comes from a place, right? Like
True.
And I think with dealcoholized wine, I think you struggle with maintaining that attachment, or I haven't seen it done yet. Well, anyway, it doesn't mean it can't happen, but I think that is we're not there yet, right? I think if you put Bourgogne on your dealcoholized Pinot Noir, well, someone expects that to taste like Burgundy,
Right.
and at this point, it doesn't. And so, what do you get, right? You get your consumers like, well, that's not very good. I won't buy that again. So, do you know what I mean? Like that is,
Yes.
We're not there yet for the general kind of fine wine consumer. They're not,
Right.
You're gonna, by putting on a label, you set expectation that we cannot match. Now, if we can get there, I think we can do that. Like as I said before earlier, the lower alcohol wines, I think we can do that. I think that is still a potential, and that's somewhere where I think we'll see some growth. We're not quite there with the dealcoholized wines yet, and so there'll be the French Blooms. There'll be those niches that are, they're cool and expensive, and there's some bling that go along with that. But I think that's a small part of the market, really.
It's true. And then what do you think about the whole marketing move with this category of mindful indulgence or consumption for low and no alcohol? Is that a good thing in your mind? Or, I mean, do you ever worry that wine's history and mystique are at risk when we chase after mindful or healthy, quote unquote, wines?
I mean, I think that's the whole genesis of this boom, is people they're just thinking about it, right?
Yes.
And so, look, we'd be remiss not to be paying attention to it. I think that wine wine is not spirits or beer, right? I think that for people who are, and this is not a blanket statement at all, but I think that if you are looking to consume alcohol, you're looking for an alcohol delivery system, I think wine is a few rungs down. So I think that we have some more social license than, say, vodka,
True.
or even beer, where it's kind of just a beverage that's consumed, at all kinds of settings, right? Most wine is consumed, at the dinner table. There's there's an occasion, sense of occasion around where we consume wine and how we consume it that sets us a little bit apart from the rest of that. Now, I think that that's healthy to have part of our industry that addresses that, that mindfulness, and current, wellness and health that that has become certainly much more a front for people when they think about their daily decisions and the things that they eat and things consume and those kinds of things. So I think that's positive. We need to play that game, and we need to maintain our social license. As we've got the WHO saying that there's no safe levels of alcohol consumption. There's that, regardless of whether you think that's true or not, right? And the data doesn't support that decision.
No, it doesn't.
But that's what these people are saying. So it's worthwhile for us to be paying attention and have a defensible position by having products like this, I think.
Do you think wine without alcohol is still wine?
Are you asking the researcher or are you asking the winemaker?
How about it's a juxtaposed question? You can answer one way and then the other if you like.
I think that the thing about dealcoholized wine is that if, for many reasons, it can replicate the occasion for when we drink wine. I think that's the biggest thing. I think that if you're thinking that, this glass of dealcoholized wine is going to taste exactly like the regular wine that you drink, I don't think that's going to be the case. But I think that in certain scenarios, when you don't want to have alcohol, it can easily replicate other things that you look to with wine and do a good job of that and still be an interesting and complex drink. And for a lot of people will be, more than adequate. If you're not drinking alcohol, what are your other options, right? Soft drinks, tea, coffee, and so we can certainly make beverages from wine or grapes that also play in that space. So yeah, I think that it absolutely has its place. And as we get better at making them, there'll be more options for people, and hopefully we can continue to again, like, be never going to be all things to all people, right? But hopefully we can make stuff that meets consumers' expectations.
And in what you've seen on the market, have you come across any clever marketing of low and no alc or interesting names for the wines?
No, I can't say I can't say I have. To be honest, you know what? Like the scientist in me, when these products show up in the lab, a lot of the time they're actually we cover the label, so we don't even get to see some of the brand.
Taking that bias out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, but you know what? That stuff's really important. Understanding what consumers want and what are they looking for with these products. I think that's another place where we really should be focusing some research, understanding what it is that they want and how we can set our products up to kind of meet those expectations.
And especially younger generations who are drinking less, so Gen Z
and more
and
adventurous,
millennials.
Right?
Yeah, more adventurous, so they're willing to try
different things.
Right.
I think that's a really big thing about that cohort is that they don't need they're happy to try whatever, right? Yeah. Let's give them some different options.
Sure. So 5 years from now, when someone opens a bottle of non-alcoholic wine, what do you hope their experience will be?
Not one of rejection. I think that's
South Lowell Bar.
Yeah, it's true. But there's been lots of people over many years who tried these products and gone, that's not very good, I'm not going to try it again, right? And so it's like
turned away from the whole category.
That's right, and they never go back, right? So I think that I think we're starting to approach the point where now that's not the case anymore. Someone's going to try them and go, this is pretty good, actually. I happily have a glass of that, and I say that too, right? And being a real oenophile, I see the quality increasing, and I also see the occasion where people are going to enjoy those. So in 5 years, I think that, again, if we move as far as we have in the past 5 years, in the next 5 years, these products will be good. They'll be good. So
great.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's a great place to be working in category-wise, right? Because you see the progress all the time.
Sure.
It's as far, because research doesn't always work like that, right? Sometimes it might be you might work your whole career in one little space to kind of just move incrementally. Where this stuff, it moves fast. So it's exciting.
That is exciting. I'm glad you're optimistic. That's great. Wes, this has been fantastic. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention as we wrap up?
No, yeah, I think we've covered it all. I think
Okay.
it's been a great chat.
Great. Excellent. Where can people find you online?
Um, look, Instagram. There's I got my own Instagram and my wine brand, Juxtaposed Wines account, on LinkedIn, AWRI website.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone
Yep.
wants to
And
have
we'll
a
put
chat,
all those
send me-
links in the show notes.
Yeah, no problem.
Wes, thank you. Don't log off, but I'll say goodbye for now. And thank you so much. It's been fascinating. I could talk another 2 hours with you. Just,
Yeah, anytime,
it's been
Natalie.
great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks very much.
All right. Cheers, Wes.
See you later. Bye bye now.
Bye.